Hi, everybody. My name's Larry, and I'm an alcoholic. And I, I'm not quite sure of the format, uh, but I believe I'm just supposed to talk for about 40 minutes.
50 minutes, sir. You could
Okay.
and go wherever you want. Talk about whatever you like, sir.
Okay. Um, how about that shortage of toilet paper we were talking about?
Sounds good to me.
Now, there's a problem. Um, again, my name is Larry, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm glad to be with you guys. And I'm just going to let you take a peek at my story of what I used to be like and what happened, what I'm like today. I am no big deal in Alcoholics Anonymous if you're new. And if you're new, I want to welcome you. Uh, I'm here to let you know that my sponsor tells me that I'm living proof that a man can stay sober for close to 39 years and not amount to a damn thing. So I'm here to give you guys hope. Uh, the highest I've ever gotten here is sober, basic human being, active member of my own home group. And that's as high as I need to get, really. I've sponsored a couple of guys who have gotten higher than that, and I can't find them. They usually show up around birthday time or something, but I'm just a fallible human being who's been blessed by a program called Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm very fortunate because I fell in love with the people of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for me, that was a big shift because I wasn't a people person. Um, I've always been some kind of loser. I was born in Detroit, and I come out to California when I was about 5 years old. My mom and dad were just kids when they had me, and they were, uh, they've never had one of me before, so they didn't know what to do, and um, they had some problems, and I wound up going into a foster home and then an orphanage and stuff, and eventually, after a couple of years, they gave it one more countless beta attempt and uh, took me out to California, and there, they tried to live that good life that everybody was talking about. I didn't know till I got to Alcoholics Anonymous how fortunate I was to have people like my parents, and I never want to forget uh, what it was like uh, sitting next to you folks new in Alcoholics Anonymous and going to your book studies and finding out things like how selfish I'd been, um, and what I would do with people who would give me love and attention and affection. And what I would do is I would play them like a fiddle, that there would never be a time too inconvenient or an age too old for me not to put the tap on my mother and father. I never want to forget that. My mom was a sweet lady. She was a little Scandinavian lady, and she stood about 5 foot tall. She kind of looked like Kim Novak, really, just a beautiful little lady. And I was to whittle her down to a neurotic mess. She was happy-go-lucky, very social, uh, just a joy to be around. And I would whittle that lady to a neurotic mess where she couldn't leave the kitchen window, for she was always staring out that window whenever there'd be a siren go by, or reading the obituaries and looking out that window all day long, wondering if the next car is going to drop me off because she never knew where I was. I never want to forget that. I never want to forget what it was like to be 17 years old and be put away for a small period of time. And when I got out of the jail, they dropped me off at Monday at the courthouse, and I was supposed to go in there. And that Monday, I didn't do that. I ran back into the neighborhood, and I came out 4 days later, Thursday morning, 8 o'clock in the morning with that rain hitting me, and I'm not at the courthouse and I'm not at home. I'm at my mom's place of business. I'm in a parking lot, hiding behind a parked car, about 50 yards away from the front of this dry cleaners where my mom works. And she's a cashier, and then she cleans homes on the weekends. And I'm ashamed of her, and I make fun of her. But I'm not too ashamed to show up unannounced on that rainy morning. I never want to forget it. Wino Joe used to call it my habiliments of despair, my dirty filth, my drunken mess, and with blood and vomit all over me. And I'm waiting for that last customer to come out of her place of business so I can make the move on her. And I'm walking through that rain, and I got my bare feet, and I open up that glass door to the dry cleaners, and that brass bell hits that glass door, and my mom turns around and makes that oh so familiar sound. Oh my God, Larry, where you been? And she pulls out her wallet, and she pulls out $1 and $2, and I run right by her and grab that money and run into Wilmington, California, where I'm going to die. Now, the thing that brings it home to me with you guys tonight is you take this same man, new in Alcoholics Anonymous, was my so-called desperation and willing to go to any length. And I need to ask you new folks something. How come when my life depends on it, if you were to put the secretary of this meeting that same distance as me and my mom in that parking lot, how come when my life depends on it, and you can bet your life it will, I can't walk that same distance and ask the secretary of a meeting for a job in a meeting that's going to save my life? But I can walk that distance and use my mom and folks like her time and time and time again. And I'm here to share with you, if you're new, that it's been my experience, and that's all I have, that if my alcoholism doesn't kill me, my selfishness and my self-centeredness will, make no mistake about that, which is why it's necessary for a man with 38 years to have a home group, a routine of meetings all week, and a job in every one of them. And it's not so I could run off to Tennessee or wherever I'm at to tell you about it, but it's for one reason and one reason only. I will never get so sober that I can't get drunk again. But I can get so drunk that I can't make it back. And I never want to forget what I used to be like and what happened to me and what I'm like today. And if I can sit with you folks and that book and my sponsor and find that thing that keeps me from serving you, I will have found a key to life. There's a miracle here. There is a miracle here. Something happens when I put myself on that plane of living. You see, I'm a something for nothing guy. I've had my hand out my entire life. Every room I've ever sat in my entire life, I sat in those chairs waiting for you to do something for me. And I would sit in these meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you guys would teach me about the meaning of being useful and being service. And the moment that I started serving Alcoholics Anonymous, I couldn't keep it from bleeding in every area of my life, that there's a miracle here. Something happens to people like me. And I am so grateful. I am so grateful that I was led by examples. This was a confusing part of my life growing up, because I had two wonderful people, parents, but they were confusing to me because they would tell me to do stuff and they wouldn't do it. And I would come to Alcoholics Anonymous, my sponsor and guys that I would hang around would not only give me suggestions, but I could see them doing it every day in these meetings. I could see them doing it at home. It spoke volumes to me. My mom was a very sweet lady, and I loved her to death, loved her to death. She loved diet pills. So she was always eating those diet pills and running around the house all day and night, sorting out nuts and bolts in the garage or raking a neighbor's yard around 4 o'clock in the morning, and you eat enough of that speed. Well, by golly, no matter what time I got up, she was up doing something, and her favorite hobby was to eat that speed and make these huge Afghans, and everything in the house had an Afghan on it, Chairs had Afghans, couches had Afghans. My dad's golf clubs had little poodle heads on them, and if we had any animals, they had a fresh vest, and we didn't have a lot of money. So she was in her little room all night about the size of a bathroom knitting all night. And you could hear it was like the garment district, just going to town, man. And I loved her to death. And, you eat enough of those diet pills, by golly, you have a lot of hobbies, you know what I mean? And you want to do them all at once, right? You're painting, you're doing your nails, you're vacuuming, you're just a bit, and her favorite hobby was to eat that speed and make these huge jigsaw puzzles, not the little 1,000 piecers, but the 1,000,000 piecers, of the Mojave Desert, and this would excite her, it's going to be a beige night tonight, honey, and she'd run down to the drugstore and get her prescription filled and get her carton of Raleigh cigarettes. She loves smoking those Raleigh cigarettes, man, because on every pack of cigarettes, there was a coupon. And if you save enough coupons, you can buy stuff. And she would always buy more yarn. It was a hideous cycle she was caught up in, one that I know you know about, and God bless her, she'd come home with that prescription and start smoking those Raleighs and put her one and only moo on she had for 50 years and start making this puzzle. And by golly, if she got a puzzle piece that didn't fit, well, she had a big pair of toenail clippers and she just snipped that son of a gun down until it fit and wedged it right in there, Just a hell of a work ethic, one that I avoided like the plague, and I loved her to death. I loved her to death, man. And my dad was a refinery worker. My dad was a World War II vet. He was born and brought up in the ghettos of Detroit. And he always used to hover over me and tell me how good I got it. You don't know how good you got it, you little rottens, And he was right. I didn't know how good I got it. I got to be beaten half to death today to be reminded of the good life that I have. I've never been strapped with gratitude, and my dad was a happy drunk. And, like I said, he was a World War II vet. And he lived a very poor life and he struggled a lot. And he went into the Navy in World War II and his ship got sunk at Midway. And he lost a bunch of his high school buddies, and he came back and married my mom and brought us out to California. And boy, my dad made drinking look good. My dad was a happy singing the blues and Nat King Cole, Bobby Darin drunk, boy. The old man loved to get drunk and sneak into his own house. It was an amazing thing, man. There's nothing, he was a window climbing alkie, There's nothing like that old boy standing on that gas meter all night, pounding on that window, hoping that it's his own home, getting ready to crack that window and make that magic dive over the toilet or the sink, And being a refinery worker, he was always working different hours every week, so you never knew where to duck from him, And he stuck in my window one night and that old boot came down on my chest, and I grabbed that boot and I said, Jesus, Dad. I said, my God, why don't you have Mom make you a set of keys? My God, she's up anyway, She could probably carve a set out with her teeth, you know what I mean? But his drinking didn't scare me, because I could see the change, man. He was a hostile man when he was sober, Back then they would discipline you, with weapons. My mom would find sticks and shit to use on me, oh, that's a good piece, let's try that, And, he was into teaching me lessons, and I started running away from home. I started running away from home at an early age, and I remember being about 5 years old. I'll never forget this. My dad came into my bedroom and he says, you're going to have a baby brother. Man, I started saving up my baseball cards and oiling up my glove and, thinking about that baby brother my mom's going to have. Me and him are going to go to the drag races and the beach and all that stuff, and 9 months later, my dad come into my room and I'm playing the drums on some cardboard boxes that I made up, and he told me that my baby brother died, that my mom went to the hospital to have the baby and the baby died. And I don't remember having any compassion for that situation or the people in it. But I remember doing something that follows me to this day. If I don't understand something, I get mad at it. And I ran after the old man with all 80 pounds, yelling and screaming at him that, you promised me. And I was to blame my father for something that he had no power over. And that would be the story of my life with that man. And not only that, what happened was the thought that it put in my head about, because my mom was always talking about religion and Jesus and God and stuff. And I thought to myself, what type of God would create a baby and kill it? I'm next. I don't ever want to believe anything that has to do with religion. And I turned my back on anything like that until I met you folks. And I remember making amends to my father because of you folks in that book. And I remember, you see, because that was going to start a wall that I was building between me and my father. I wasn't a kid who grew up to be like his dad. I grew up waiting to get as tall as he was so that I could go after him. I couldn't stand what I was hearing at night. I couldn't stand the violence in the house and stuff. And my dream was to get even with him. I couldn't stand the sounds of my mother in pain. And I was to make amends to my father because of that book. And I sat my father down and I told him about that. And he says, I need to tell you something about that, Larry, about what happened that morning with you and your kid brother. He says, I've seen a lot of things in my life, son. I've seen a lot of tragedy. I've been in a lot of very tough, terrorizing situations. He says, I've seen a lot of fires in the refineries and I've been in war and stuff. He says, I want to tell you about the worst day of my life. He says, the worst day of my life was that day that I had to come talk to you. He says, because for 9 months, I'd watched you save your cards and get your hopes up. And you had a dream, and I'd never seen you with the dream. And he says, the worst day of my life was knowing that I was going to have to walk down the hallway and come into your room and tell you about your baby brother. He says, I would have hated me too. I would have hated me too. He said, but I didn't want to tell you a lie. I had to tell you the truth. And I was able to forgive my father. I was able to start becoming friends with the man that I hated for so long. And I'll never forget the life that we had, that I was able to make amends to a man and walk the man out of this thing called life who walked me into life. We became best of friends. But at about the age of 11 years old, I started running away from home because I felt more a part of life on a street corner underneath a street light than I did around my own dinner table. And around 11 years old, there was about 4 of us guys, and one of us stole a bottle of Four Rose whiskey, and we started drinking that Four Rose whiskey, 11 and 12 years old. And I never laughed so hard my entire life. You know, I never threw up so much my entire life, you know. And I remember that evening. I had the most magical evening of my life at 11 years old. I kissed my first Latin woman. It was my aunt. She was 46 years old. I went after my Auntie Della. You know, my uncle didn't like it, but I marked it, you know. And that following morning, I knew I was going to get banged up by a piece of wood or something once the old man found out. And I remember that morning I came out of that room and I looked around, you know, to find out where he was. And the only thing that was different was that there was a big padlock on his bar, you know. And what happened to me that morning is I remembered that night. You see, I'd always been a nobody. You hear it long enough, you begin to believe it, and you begin to behave like it. And what happened to me that day when I drank that Four Rose whiskey is eventually I found that this little nobody became somebody for 3 or 4 hours. And to a nobody, that's top of the world. And I would rather be a somebody for 4 hours than an all-time nobody. Because at that time in my life, there wasn't anything that I was doing that made me feel a part of this world. I always have what that book called that conscious separation from me and my fellow man. That no matter what I was doing and who I was with, there was just something different between us. You guys were able to grasp and develop a manner of living that shifted you into life. And I couldn't grasp that. I didn't know what was going on with me. And I found my safe spot. And I didn't head out to Skid Row the next day and lose my paper route and come to AA, you know. But I marked that spot and I knew where to get it. It was all over the house, you know. And by the time I'm a freshman in high school, you know, kids are looking in their locker rooms to get their books and their pencils and stuff. And I'm going to my locker room to get a little shot of Thunderbird wine, maybe, you know. I started dating this little Mexican girl, and she had some brothers, and they like cars, and I love cars to this day. I'm not like you guys out. I don't have I didn't have a big Dodge truck with these 9-foot tires that you can drive over each other's barn with and stuff. But I did have a 62 Chevy Impala drop right down to the ground, and I had my hair slicked back. I had my, white T-shirt with my black Frisco pants that came up to here, and we drive around, drinking that little cheap wine and listening to the Four Tops and the Temptations and the OJs and Marvin Gaye. And God, I loved it, man. And, I was in my plumbing truck the other day, and the Four Tops came on, and I just started sinking in my little car, and my little girlfriend, Loopy, she used to curl her hair with soup cans, and the noodles were stuck in there, and we'd drive around all night, bounce around all night, wondering what the heck you're looking at, her girlfriends would tell her that men who are well endowed had big feet. So I went out and bought me a pair of 15-inch shoes that I was driving around in. Had my big hair, my big feet, and I loved it, man. And I became somebody, and I hung around those guys for a long time, man. And it just became a way of life. I found my folks. And around 1969, people are going to different places, and I don't know what to do with my life. So I thought maybe I'd grab my buddy and we bounce back to Detroit and find my roots, from Los Angeles. And we head out. And I made it to Phoenix. And I'm over there at Phoenix on Roosevelt and North Central at the Apache Hotel, 5 floors out, and everybody has a TV. It's in the lobby. Everybody has a bathroom. It's down the hall. $35 a night, and I'm running out of money to pay for my room, and I'm afraid to leave the room during the day, and I'm afraid to be by myself at night. I constantly have these delirious tremens. I'm having these convulsions. I don't know what they're. I think I'm like I got it's epilepsy or something like that. I don't know what's causing them, and so I've become friends with the morning drink, and I don't know about this thing called a phenomenon of craving. I can't understand why after 5 drinks, I'm winding up in different cities, and I don't know what's going on with me. So I try all these, avenues of control that don't work, or maybe I'll just, when my bottom lip begins to be numb, then I know that I'm getting close. I better watch it, and by then it's too late, and all kinds of stuff. And I don't know what's going on with me. And I find my little bar down the street a couple blocks away, and it's called the Wagon Wheel Bar. And the Wagon Wheel is a beautiful bar, no window, just a dirty curtain blowing through the doorway. And I meet a guy named Ernie in there, and every bar has an Ernie. Ernie is the answer man, You have a flat tire, Ernie's got the answer. You need a dog, Ernie's got the answer. Whatever it is, And I told him my dilemma. He says, come down the next morning. He says, we'll put you to work. And showed up the next morning, and Ernie introduced me to this plumber. Well, I've never plumbed a day in my life, for God's sakes, But the idea of being in your house, I like. So he introduces me to this plumber, and they take me out to the desert, stick me underneath the house, and he says, all I want you to do, kid, is get under this house and just hang copper. That's all I want you to do. And he gave me a transistor radio, and I got a pint of PM bourbon I'm sneaking in there, and there's nothing like being under I love the idea of being in your house or under it or in your attic, anywhere. And I'm underneath this new house, and I'm all excited about what I could find here on my new adventure. And I start crawling underneath that house, and I see this stray cat, and I go, oh my God, this is great. This is great. I'm on top of the world, man. I've got a transistor radio. I've got a pint of whiskey. I've got a pet. This is the first time in my life everything's going together, man. My life is starting to come together here, right? Start drinking that hot bourbon, man. If there's anything that gives me hope, is that hot bourbon going down and clearing away all that dust, And I start drinking that hot bourbon, and after a couple hours, man, I'm drunk and disorderly, and I'm busting up through the lady's floor, and I rob her of her money and some of her jewelry, And at the end of the day, the boss comes and he drags me from underneath that house, and this cat comes running out with a bunch of necklaces on, and put me in jail for about 2 months. And I get out of there and I go back to the old Wagon Wheel bar. And Ernie says, this is what we're going to do. He says, we're going to get you, there's a horse track not too far from here, kid. He says, we're going to get you down to about 95 pounds. You're going to be a jockey. And I go, all right. And I get all excited, and he says, I'm thinking we're going to start working out, all this stuff. He said, well, I don't know about that. He said, but I need you to take this stuff here and take this stuff for about 2 months. And then after about 2 months, I'll come back and get you and we'll go weigh you in. And he says, I'm pretty sure you'll be down to 95 pounds, and I don't know what this stuff is, I'm just used to just drinking cheap wine and whiskey and doing heroin and minding my own business, and this guy gives me this speed stuff, and I'm not, heck, I'm not going to take that stuff. And, I'm no Afghan maker, for God's sake, and he leaves me with this stuff. And he comes back 2 weeks later. He didn't wait for 2 months. 2 weeks later, he comes back and he knocks on that little hotel room. And he opens up the door, and I haven't moved an inch, right? I've just been taking that stuff and running around my room, chasing a fly and looking out my window every 10 seconds going, what's that? What's that? What's that? Or I'm hiding underneath the bed because I'm scared to death of these black and white flashes that I'm seeing, which was the sun going up and down, for God's sakes, He says, you couldn't have possibly taken all that stuff. Well, I did, Ernie. You can put a saddle on me and ride me around here, So we canned that idea. And I went back to the bar and I started working for this other plumber. And I worked for this guy for about, maybe about 2 hours. And I found out that he was younger than me. And I ain't working for no kid. I've got my pride. So I did what any honorable man from Detroit would do. I faked a knee injury. And they took me to the county hospital, and the doctor writes me a prescription for Percodan, and then he leaves the room, and he leaves me a cardboard box full of blank prescription pads he wanted me to have. So I take that little box and I run down to the old Wagon Wheel bar, and I show Ernie my new present, and he gets all excited. He calls these guys down in Yuma, Arizona, and and we start drinking that cheap tequila and writing prescriptions and selling them, man. We're writing prescriptions for Seconal and Tuinal and Nebutol and you name it all. We wrote it all, and damn near took it all too, And after about 9 months, they caught up with me. And when you're loaded on that cheap whiskey and barbiturates, there's no freeway chase on Channel 5. You know what I mean? There was no helicopters or nothing. I was going 9 miles an hour. And the cop was on foot. He was just walking by the door, pounding on my window. Come on, kid, open up that door, and I'm looking at this man going, my God, can this man run, Well, they yanked me out of that car and they arrested me and put me in jail for a little over a year. I get out of that jail. In 1973, they put me on a Continental Trailway bus and sent me from Phoenix to Los Angeles, California again. And I go to register at the probation department, and my probation officer puts me on antabuse. And in 1973, I'm on this antabuse. There's no AA, no nothing. He just sticks me on this antabuse. And for the first time in my life since I'm 13, I don't have a thing in my system. And he gets me I get this little downtown hotel room in downtown Torrance. And it's just a room of boarding rooms. It's a boarding house with a long hallway, and there's 5 beds, 5 little rooms on this side and 5 little rooms on this side. And they're all about the size of a little bedroom in the house. And there's a little sink on the wall. And here's what my dream is at that point in my life, is that every now and then I would look out my window at the Mayfair Hotel across the street, and I would read this sign, rooms with hot plates. And that was my goal, that one of these days I'm going to have a little boarding house room with a hot plate. That was my goal. And my probation officer, after 2 months on this antabuse stuff, he gives me a voucher for a job interview. Now, at this time in my life, I'm not driving, and I'm not going to drive till I'm 32 years old, 2 years sober in AA. And you know what that's like when you take buses. You're either 3 hours early or 3 hours late. There's none of this I'll be right there stuff. You know what I mean? And sure enough, I get this job interview to be a part-time janitor at midnight at a refinery. And so I take the bus down to this little city called El Segundo, California. And I'm 4 hours early before my little interview. And I'm walking around this little town, and I gravitate myself over to the park there. There's a Little League field. And I start wandering through this park, and I go to the Little League diamond, and I go into the dugout. Now, I'm 2 months without a thing in my system but this antabuse. There's no alcohol. There's no nothing. And I sit in this dugout, and that past starts chewing me up again. I start thinking about things, and I start crying like a baby. Then I start laughing like a clown. And I start crying, and this little, merry-go-round, this thing goes laughing and crying thing. It lasts for a couple hours. And then this paranoia that I've never had before that used to come and go when I would be DTing sticks with me, and it chokes me out, and it starts squeezing out these terrifying hallucinations that don't go away. They stick. Somebody sees me milling around that baseball diamond, and they call the paramedics, and they come and get me and take me to Harbor General Hospital in 1974. And the doctor comes up to me and says I'm somewhat catatonic. And he says, seems to me, son, that the way you've been living for the past several is that you need to be in a little state hospital and have them observe you for about 30 or 60 days, so we can dial in on what's going on with you. And he put me in this little van with my arm and leg strapped down and took me for a little ride, and they brought me to a state hospital where they were going to observe me for 30 or 60 days. And a year later, they let me out, totally observed. And they gave me the medication. And I was convinced, and I had them convinced, that it was my past that was causing me all my problems. That if I could just forget the past, if I could just move on, the past is always haunting me. That's the worst part of this not drinking stuff, And at this time in my life, all my life, I've had people sitting in front of me. All my life, no matter where I went, no matter what the office or the clinic or the institution I was in, every one of these well-meaning people, religious people, everybody had been sitting across from me since I was 15 years old till I was 30, telling me stuff like this. Larry, if you stopped drinking, everything would be all right. And every one of them had pamphlets and literature and information and pictures of my fat feet and my fat liver. And every one of them busted their chops and did what they were taught to do and did their best to talk me into being an alcoholic. And my saving grace was they couldn't do that. My saving grace is that nobody could talk me into being an alcoholic, because they would have robbed me of the most defining moment of my life. When one day I would sit with you folks and fully concede to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic, that this would be the first step in recovery. That when I concede to my innermost, now nobody talks you into that spot. We drink ourselves to that point. Everybody says, oh, I can't, I want to keep Alcoholics Anonymous so pristine, so in case my daughter or son comes here, it'll be there for them. And I understand that, but I just dread the journey they have to take to get here. And thank God they couldn't rob me of that divining moment. And I had them convinced and myself that my past would be my problem. And then I would sit with you. And I would sit in our books. And I would sit with my sponsor. And we would read stuff like we read today. You won't want to regret the past. That your past is your greatest asset, Larry. And thank God they couldn't get rid of it. Thank God they couldn't get rid of it. Because that would be the thing that connects me to you. That would be the very thing that I could pull down from the shelf and that there was a rightful place for it. And that is when I'm talking to a new man about some of the things that's happened to him in his life when he's not drinking. Everybody has something that makes them feel different when they're sober. Everybody does. Yeah, we've got this thing called that, but there's something else going on with our, everybody has something to hang their hat on that makes them feel a little bit different. And when I was to sit with you and talk about these things, I found out that I was throwing my first little anchor into trusting people. And if you're new and you feel different, I urge you to find somebody that you can talk to about that difference. And I guarantee you this, you are not going to shock the people in Alcoholics Anonymous with whatever it is. Because I'm looking, you know, if it hasn't been done by the first 3 rows of this gallery, it just hasn't been thought of yet. You are not going to shock the people in AA, you know, and that'll be the very thing that would draw us closer to closer, the miracle of identification. And thank God they couldn't burn that out of my head. And after a year, I got out of this little institution over there in Gardena, California. And I left there and they put me on Thorazine. And after 2 months, I ran out of Thorazine. And in 1975, they found me in downtown Los Angeles, Skid Row, across the street at Alvaro Street at a Chevron gas station on a pile of tires. And I wasn't over there vaping. I was over there to get out of the jungle. And every downtown has a jungle. Every big city has one. Because at that time in my life, at the ripe old age of 29 years old, there wasn't a thing that I wouldn't do to get a shot of alcohol in my system. There is no invisible line of I can't do this. And every now and then I had to get out of there just to catch my breath. And in 1975, they found me on those little tires over there, and they arrested me for a public nuisance, violation of probation, out-of-state forgeries. And they sentenced me to 3.5 years in a state penitentiary. They sent me up to the Wayside County Jail where I'm going to wait for my trial. And after about 3 months, they put about 50 of us in a black and white bus and send us to the South Bay Courthouse in Torrance, California, where I'm going to be tried and sent away. And that morning, all 40 of us came in there chained together in a holding tank, about the size of 2 big garages. One by one, the judge started calling these guys out, and they all were leaving. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm the only one left. I'm sitting on a concrete floor with a bonds bag and no hope, wondering where they're going to send me now. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I heard the most beautiful sound I've heard for a long time, and that was the sound of some keys coming down the hall. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there's a Scottish man with a patch standing outside a jail door. And he's all clean and he's sharp. And he says these words, "Aye, lad." He says, "Are you Larry Thomas?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." He says, "Ah, that's great. That's great." He says, "My name is Alex." He says, "Come with me, son. We're going to AA." And I thought, AA? What's AA? You know, I've heard of OR and PO, but what's AA, you know, and who's the Scottish pirate all of a sudden, you know? I've been hallucinating so much, I didn't know if he was real, you know? And looking back well over 40 years, I know he was as real as rain, because he, what you folks would teach me, would be a trusted servant. And what made that man a trusted servant in my heart and soul is simply this. He had no business being there. He wasn't a probation officer. He wasn't a counselor. He was a refinery worker who just got the worst news of his life. And that news was that his sweet little wife was dying of a terminal illness. And he knew she was in good hands, but he knew he wasn't. Somewhere in his little meeting in Tennessee on a Saturday night, somewhere in his home group in Bellflower, California, somewhere in his home group in Eureka Springs, that man would sit with you folks in that book and grasp and develop a manner of living that taught him this. Practical experience tells us nothing will ensure immunity from drinking but offensive work with other alcoholics. That this works. He didn't think of milk and whiskey. It had been removed, just like it was removed by Bill in 1935 when he's laying in that bed in the town's hospital. He didn't just lay there and it was removed. He had a visitor. He had his high school buddy, Ebby, come in there. Our first court card. Ebby came in there. He was sent by the judge. He went to the Oxford. Ebby came in there to testify. And he had these proposals. And he grabbed his high school buddy, Bill, and he took him through these proposals. And Bill had this profound experience. Oh, my God. One that never would happen to me. And for 5 years, I thought I was doing this thing wrong. For 5 years, when I finally got sober in 80, I thought I was doing it wrong because I didn't have a kaboomy like that. And then again, I would sit with you folks in that book study and read that 2 paragraphs after Bill has that humongous experience, 2 paragraphs after that, laying in that same bed, Bill had the thought that maybe I should work with other alcoholics. He didn't have the thought of maybe I should go out and help everybody. The thought came to him that maybe I should carry this message. There wasn't even an AA yet. Now, how many of you had that feeling your first day? That's how rare it is. And maybe, just maybe, for a guy like me, that maybe Bill's hoping that the thing that happened to him suddenly, he's hoping will happen to me gradually, but the end game is the same. That this sobriety isn't mine to keep and to hoard and to pride myself on. This thing is given to me for one reason and one reason only, to tell that other plumber about what I used to be like and what happened and what I'm like today. And he's hoping that I'll do that with it. And that man took me to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was ready for a long ride up north and maybe some lunch, right? No, Alex took me to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1975 for a 15-minute car ride. And in that car, he told me the news. He said, son, I know you've had a tough life and you feel different. He says, I can't wait for you to meet these people. He was so happy that I was going to meet you. He couldn't wait. And he rolled up to this dingy, stinky, rotten Torrance Lameda Alano Club. It was an AA clubhouse. And he starts introducing me to all these Alanos. He started introducing all these people with nicknames and tattoos, Indian Genie and Captain Bob and Tennessee Bill and Singing Sam, Serenity Sam, Bicycle Ray, Santa Claus Ray, Dancing Pete, Whistling Butt. Oh, my God. I just left a bunch of people like this, you know. Little Moose was 120 years old. She comes running after me. Oh, my God, honey, my name is Moose, and I'm expecting a miracle. He said, I bet you are. I said, I'm not it, you know. And then this transvestite starts circling me like a helicopter in Los Angeles. And he came up to me in his new moo-moo and he says, hi. He says, I can't wait to take you to a candlelight meeting. I said, I don't think so, big guy, you know, not till I get my year. And I told Alex, I said, my God, that guy's got big feet, you know. And I came in and out of AA. I left out, man, if that's the effect of that big blue book, I don't want to crack that thing open, you know. And from 1975 to 1982, I came in and out of the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that don't make me a better member or a worse alkie. All it did is prove to me one more time that I'm a something for nothing guy. That all my life, no matter what room I sat in, I would sit there and wait for you to do something for me. I made the biggest mistake a man like me could be when I came to AA. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous to get something. I came to get something. And if you're new, it's been my experience, and my experience only, that for me, there's nothing to get here. There's nothing to get in AA. For God's sakes, look around you. There's nothing to get here. You know what I mean? The only thing you're going to get if you're new, be prepared to be divinely inconvenienced for the rest of your damn life. Because this is the longest thing I've ever done against my will my entire life, which is why it worked so well. It has nothing to do with convenience. It has everything to do with you getting out of yourself. You doing the uncomfortable to get comfortable. And every time I called Alcoholics Anonymous, I got this Montana cowboy, and he would come and get me. His name was Don Adamson. He's passed away. Every time I called, and every time I called that man, he would come and get me. And I would be in an alley, or I would be in a hotel, or I would be in a park where people had arrested me and stuff like that. And the only thing he would say is, "You ready to go to a meeting?" And on May 2nd, 1982, I was getting thrown out of a Beacon Light mission. They had about 50, maybe 10 beds. Every morning they would kick you out, and at 6 at night they'd let you come back in, and you would shower, and you would pray, and you would sing for your beans, and you sang Amazing Grace 3 times, and then they would feed you. And I got kicked out that morning, and I'm sitting in the gutter, and I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about that bald-headed carpenter. And I panhandled some money. And I called up Don, and I said, "Don, this is Larry. I'm ready to come back to AA. Will you come and get me?" And he told me the most profound thing I've ever heard in my life. He said, "No." He says, "You know where we are. You know what we got." He says, "Why don't you get your rusty rear down here yourself? I'm tired of chasing after you, son." And he hung up. And I said, "My God, whatever happened to that AA love?" I just heard it. For the first time in my life, it was up to me to come to you. It was no longer necessary for the good people of Alcoholics Anonymous to be inconvenienced by my nonsense. And I roamed around, and I started crying like a baby because I knew I was going to drink again. See, I'd been down there in the gutter before, and I knew that my desperation wasn't enough to keep me sober. It may be enough for me to get to you, but it wasn't enough to keep me sober. And I came to believe that morning. And I didn't come to believe in God that morning, or Jesus, or the big book, or sponsor, but I came to believe in the hopelessness and the futility of my life, with me running my life any longer. I knew that at 30 years old, I was at the end of my game, that I ran out of things to do. There is a big difference between quitting drinking and surrendering. Every time I quit, I started up again. But I never surrendered. I never believed that I didn't have the power to drink again. And I was licked. And I conceded to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic. And I walked that 10 miles with my poopy pants and no hope, with one thing on my mind. I got to ask this guy something. I got to ask Don something. I never asked this guy anything. I just took for him. And I walked that 10 miles. It took me 2 weeks to get there. And I showed up at that club. And a couple by the name of Frank and Lucille, he was a refinery worker. They rocked me to sleep. And they paced me around that Alano Club. And they gave me honey and orange juice and buttermilk. And they held on to me when I was shaking. And they told me Don would be here at noontime. And when Don showed up, I asked him that thing that I never asked him. I said, "Don, I don't know what to do with my life. Would you be my sponsor?" And that man lit up like a chandelier for about 5 seconds. And then he lit into me for 20 minutes. And he gave me the wood. He said, "Here's the contract, son. You make the effort, I'll make the effort. You don't make the effort, lose my number, Larry. I've got guys that want to stay sober." And I fell in love with that man. And here is the miracle of surrender. Here is why I was so glad that nobody could talk me being an alcoholic. When I finally conceded to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic, and I found out what an alcoholic was by listening to your stories, I identified with you. I identified with you with the fact that the thing that people have been trying to get me to do is the very thing that drove me to drink, sobriety. And I didn't know about that. I didn't know that I needed to have more than desperation. That when desperation is like any other emotion that I have, after 3 months, it wears off. And if I don't replace desperation with inspiration, I'm a dead man. And then again, I can't stay sober on inspiration either. I need perpetuation. I need to do something with this inspiration. Now, you can only tell a guy to do stuff for so long. But when a man's inspired, look out. You won't have to remind him of what meetings are. You don't have to remind him when the book study is. You don't have to remind him what his sponsor's phone number. You don't have to remind him. He's got a fire lit under him that you won't believe. And the thing that fans that fire is not what he's getting. It's what he's given to that other new man. You could rename that whole chapter, working with others. Who's helping who? And something happened to me when I started helping these guys. And you don't have to be a sponsor to help a guy. God, with 2 weeks, I was taking these guys to you. I was taking them to the message. And you guys would take care of them. And I would learn what a sponsor was by you. And I tell you, when you are surrendered at that moment, when a man becomes so humbled at the point of surrender, where he asks for help finally, I believe after they have 5 and 10 years, and it's been my experience that I've witnessed that the obsession to drink will never come back as a form of a drink. The obsession to drink will come back as a form of, I don't need to do this anymore. I don't need to go to this Zoom. I don't need to do this. And we start shifting away from the formula that got us this far. You people have taught me that there's one answer to all problems. You may have a lot of problems. You don't need a lot of answers. There is one answer to all problems. Trust God, clean house, and work with others. Your life becomes one big 12-step call. You're the same at work that you are in these meetings. You're the same with your precious little wife, Rosie, that you are at these meetings. You're the same in your neighborhood as you are. You're doing it for fun and for free. Now, for a something-for-nothing guy, every now and then, this goof will do something for somebody expecting nothing in return, just for the sheer joy of doing it. Just for the sheer joy of doing it. On May 2nd, 1982, I fell in love with you. And for this non-believer, this guy who had such a stone wall, it's this thing called God. After about 7 years sober, you held me to the test. Because when I was new, you would tell me, don't worry about that God stuff, Larry. Don't worry about it. You'll go on with the other steps. You don't got to worry about it. And then at about 7 years sober, you called me on it in a book study. You said, this is a how and why of it. You said, first of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. It says, next, we decided that hereafter, in the drama of life, God was going to be our director. He's the principal. We are his agents. He is the father. We're his children. Most good ideas are simple. And this concept was the keystone of new and triumphant arc through which we passed. So whatever you choose to be your higher power, whatever it is, you better have it. What is it? What is it going to be? Is it going to be, what you decided it was? Is it going to be the father, the employer? Whatever it is, it's up to you. But you better have it, because it says on the next page, when we sincerely take a position. What position? What he's going to be. When you sincerely take that position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer, being all power. He provided what we needed. If we kept close to it and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs, and more we became interested in seeing what we can contribute to life. All I ever wanted to be was a good son. That's all I ever wanted to be. And at 10 years sober, I found out that I was a good son, that I wanted to be my father's son, that I decided that he was going to be my father and I was going to be his son. My sponsor told me that he never had a son, but if he did, it would be me. He says, you can't do anything anymore, Larry, to make me love you. And you can't do anything to make me not love you, son. I just love you. He says, just seek ye first the kingdom, son. I said, Johnny, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know Bible, Johnny. I don't know what you're talking about. He said, for God's sakes, Larry, put all your efforts into staying sober, son, and the rest of your life will take care of itself. And the more you start pecking around your personal life, the more upside down you're going to get. And I found my kingdom with you. I found it with you. I became AA, son. My father. What a good place for me to be, for a lost individual to be found. And I fell in love with the people. And all those years and to this day, something happens to me, to a non-believer. And it's simply this. And this is why I love my commitments in AA. I'm just a coffee maker. I'm no big deal in AA. If I never talk again, I'll be all right. But I love making your coffee. And something happens to me, and it seems like it's this, that the more I serve you, the clearer he becomes. And the more I serve me, the darker I become. There's a miracle here. There is a miracle here. And I'm a stickler for evidence. And I got to wrap this up because I'm sure the secretary is at his wit's end right now. But I can tell you this. For this non-believer, this stickler for evidence, all I can tell you if you're new, that on a Saturday night in Tennessee, I see row after row after row of people who should be dead, locked up, or insane. And look at us tonight. Look at that. We're all happy, we're joyous, and we're free and got a little bit of peace. Some of us got a little bit of hope. I don't ever have to wonder where God's at. I've been staring at the evidence all night long. All night. That's what's so unique when you sponsor people. Think about it if you will. Every one of you, think about the day you were before you came to AA and where you're at right now. Tell me something hasn't moved you. Tell me something about the man with one day and then that guy or gal getting ready to make their amends. That's a whole different cat. That's a whole different person. I've been playing in the evidence of a power greater than myself for 38 years. And I can't deny what I see. I can't deny what I've been in tonight. Oh, you can call this what you want, but you'll never be able to block that thing that happens when me and you are together. Yeah. I want to thank you folks for this night. Thank you.